Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we are heading on an adventure to the American Southwest. It's a land of huge deserts, and you know what? It has some incredible history. We're going to find out how different groups of people didn't just survive there, they totally thrived.
Okay, let's start with a little thought experiment. Just imagine for a second, you're plopped right in the middle of a hot, dry desert. What do you do? Where would you live? What would you even eat? It's a really tough situation, right? Well, some people became absolute masters at solving these exact problems.
And that brings us to our three groups of desert experts. We're going to get to know the Pueblo, the Navajo, and the Apache peoples. Each one had their own super smart way of making the desert their home. Ready? Let's dive in.
First up, let's talk about the Pueblo people. Seriously, if there was an award for the best builders in the desert, they would win it, no question. They were absolute master builders.
So what was their secret? It was all about their architecture. They built these incredible, multi-story apartment buildings using stone and a special sun-dried clay called adobe. When the Spanish explorers first saw them, they called these villages pueblos, which is just Spanish for village. And, well, the name stuck.
So how did these buildings work? Picture stacking big boxes on top of each other, getting smaller as you go up, kind of like a pyramid with steps. You didn't use stairs, you used wooden ladders to get between floors. And here's the really clever part. The rooms on the ground floor often had no doors at all. You had to climb a ladder to the roof and then go down through a hole. If an enemy was coming, they'd just pull up the ladders. Talk about a built-in security system.
And deep inside their villages, the Pueblo people built these special underground rooms called kivas. You can think of them like a super important community center, a sacred space used for all of their most important religious ceremonies and community meetings.
So, who were these Pueblo people? Well, one of the big groups are the Hopi. And in a Hopi village, everybody had a job, and every job was important. The men took care of the farming, growing corn and beans, and they also hunted and wove cotton into fabric. The women gathered wild foods, like nuts and berries, and they were amazing artists, making beautiful pottery and baskets to store food. Now, a huge part of their life was about their spiritual beliefs, especially something called kachinas. The Hopi believed kachinas were powerful spirits that brought something they desperately needed in the desert, rain for their crops. To honor these spirits, dancers wearing incredible masks would perform, and kids were given small carved kachina dolls to help them learn all about the different spirits.
Okay, let's move on to our next group, the Navajo. I like to call them the great learners because they were fantastic at watching what others were doing, learning from them, and making those skills their own.
These guys were amazing adopters. When they met the Pueblo people, they saw them farming and weaving and said, "Hey, that's a great idea," and they learned how to do it. Then, later on, when the Spanish arrived, the Navajo saw them with sheep and horses and quickly became expert sheep herders and incredible horse riders. They just took the best ideas from everyone around them. Now, the Navajo didn't live in those big apartment-style pueblos. They lived in homes called hogans. These were these cool, dome-shaped houses made from logs or stone and then covered in mud to keep them cool. And there was a very specific rule. The single door always had to face east to greet the rising sun each morning. At the very heart of Navajo culture is this really beautiful idea called hojo. It translates to walking in beauty, and it's all about living your life in balance and harmony with the world, with the earth. They believe that if you fall out of balance, that's when things go wrong, so they have special ceremonies to help restore that harmony.
And that brings us to our third group of experts, the Apache. If the Pueblo were the master builders, then the Apache were the master survivors. They knew the desert inside and out and were experts at living off the land.
And here's a cool fact to help you remember them. The name Apache, well, that isn't what they actually called themselves. It comes from a word in the Zuni language, that's a Pueblo group, that means enemy. And why? Because the Apache were known for being fierce warriors who would sometimes raid other groups for food and supplies.
You can really see the massive difference in their lifestyles right here. While the Pueblo people stayed in one place and became expert farmers, the Apache were constantly on the move. They were expert hunter-gatherers. They hunted big animals like buffalo and deer and knew exactly which wild plants and berries were safe to eat. And because they moved around so much, their homes had to be easy to build and take down. They lived in something called a wickiup. You'd make one by sticking flexible branches in the ground in a circle, bending them into a dome shape, and then covering the whole thing with animal skins or grass mats. It was basically the perfect portable desert home.
All right, so there we have it. We've met our three groups, the builders,
the learners, and the survivors. Each one had a totally different but totally brilliant game plan for living in the Southwest.
Okay, let's put it all together. Think of this slide as your ultimate cheat sheet, your study guide. You can see it all side by side. The Pueblo lived in permanent pueblos and were farmers. The Navajo lived in hogans and learned to farm and herd. And the Apache lived in portable wickiups and were expert hunters. 3 amazing cultures, all perfectly suited to the same tough environment.
So, I'll leave you with this one last question to chew on. When it comes to living in the desert, which way of life do you think was the most clever? Building a fortress like the Pueblo? Adapting and learning new skills like the Navajo? Or being a master of the wilderness like the Apache? There's really no right answer, but it just goes to show you there's always more than one way to be an expert. Thanks for joining me.